Right, good morning. I hope everybody had a very Merry Christmas, and if I don't see you before Friday, hope you all have a good New Year celebration. We will be worshiping on Thursday, New Year's Eve, for our Watch Night service, so I hope you can join us for that at 7:30 here in this room. We've been going through the book of Exodus for some time now. And we've made it all the way towards the end of the book. So if you have your Bible, if you would turn to Exodus chapter 32, we're going to be in verses 1 to 6. The title of the sermon this morning is The Attractions of Idolatry. All right, and I'll explain where I get that title from later on in the sermon this morning. We have an immense amount to get through, and this really should probably be 2 sermons. But I'm going to try to get through it all in one sermon because it kind of just goes together to be in one versus a 2-part series. So we need to jump right in. I admit that it probably seems kind of strange to preach on a topic like this 2 days after Christmas and 5 days before the New Year. It's like, why are you preaching about idolatry at this time? But I hope you'll see that I think it's befitting, especially considering as we reflect upon 2015 and going forward to 2016 and ways that we want to grow in the new year. So Exodus chapter 32, beginning in verse 1 to verse 6. If you will read along, following the text with me. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up! Make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in your ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. If you will pray with me. Father, I pray right now that you would keep our minds and our hearts, our spirits, and our physical bodies awake to listen to what your Spirit is speaking through us through your word. Lord, that you would help us to really consider how we've grown in 2015 and where we still have room to grow in 2016. And Lord, especially in this all too important area of idolatry, that you'd help us to really make a critical examination of our hearts this morning. God, we are desperate and very much in need of your help in this process, Lord, to really peel back the layers of our heart to see where we still have room to grow in killing the idols of our life and in worshiping you. And so I pray you come, please now, Father, through the power of your Spirit, come now and do this work in our hearts. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. What I'm going to be doing this morning is starting off with an exposition of the text, going through verse by verse, verses 1 through 6. And then at the end, I have several points I'm going to make, and I'll explain what we're going to do there. So let's begin going verse by verse with an exposition of the text, beginning in verse 1. All right, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Now, last month, we looked at this verse of chapter 32, verse 1, and we examined the fickleness of man. We saw that God had told Moses to come up to the mountain, and while on the mountain, God gave Moses all the instructions for the building of the tabernacle and all the instructions for the 8 offerings that we looked at 2 weeks ago. God is basically giving the people a way that they can worship him and meet with him. Now, all of those instructions took place over 40 days. And during these 40 days, the people are encamped at the base of the mountain, waiting for Moses to get these instructions. Well, 1 day goes by, 2 days go by, 3 days go by, 4 days, several days go by. And the text says that when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down the mountain, they gathered themselves together to Aaron. Now, I was looking up the Hebrew of that phrase, gathered themselves together to Aaron. And this phrase is used 4 other times in Scripture. 3 of those are in Numbers. And all 3 times in Numbers, it's not translated as gathered together to Aaron. It's translated as gathered together against. Let me show you this real quick. Numbers 16:3. They assembled themselves together against Moses and Aaron. This will be on the screen for you. Numbers 16:42. And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and Aaron. Numbers 22. And they assembled themselves together against Moses and Aaron. Now, why do I point this out? Because all 3 examples in Numbers are the exact same Hebrew expression that's used in 32:1. That may give us an insight as to why did Aaron go along with this plan. It would appear that the people have not gathered to Aaron, but have gathered against him. They have banded together and come against Aaron. And we can only imagine the scene, right? So this is all speculation. We can only imagine the scene. Them coming to Aaron saying, Aaron, you and your brother brought us into the desert, which isn't that great, by the way. We've already run out of water once. We've already run out of food once. We've been attacked in battle. It feels like we're wandering in the desert. What? You did this, so up! Make us gods who will go before us. As for your brother Moses, we don't know what happened to him. I imagine Aaron was feeling the pressure from the people. We don't know if Aaron did this out of fear of man or maybe to please man. But if he did, I just want to make the point that fear of man can often lead to idolatry. Pleasing man over pleasing God can often lead to idolatry. Now, what should Aaron have done when the people came to him? Aaron should have pulled out the book of the covenant. He should have pulled it out and read to them and said, it says right here, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make a carved image of me. I mean, this morning we looked at the example where Jesus was in the desert in Sunday school, where the devil comes and tempts him. And what does Jesus do? How does he fight temptation? He pulls out the book of the covenant, which he had apparently memorized almost, and quotes it word for word. I want to encourage you this morning that when you feel tempted to fear man over God, or when you feel tempted to please man over God, and we all face this probably almost every week, if not every day of our life, go back to what does God say? What did God tell us on the matter? And pull that out and quote it, preach it to yourself. The way Jesus did. Aaron didn't do that. And it was very costly, as we'll see in the coming weeks. Verse 2-3. So Aaron said to them, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, bring them to me. So they took off the rings of gold that were in their ears, and they brought them to Aaron. Now, 2 things stand out to us here. Number 1, where did the people get the gold earrings? They've been slaves for 430 years. How did they all get gold earrings? God gave it to them. You remember in Exodus 12? For they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that He let them have them, so they let them have what they asked for. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. And then 2, why did God give it to them? Why did God give them all this gold and silver jewelry? Well, as we saw a few weeks ago, God gave it to them so they could give it back to Him. God had given them all of this gold and silver so they could give it back to God. As we saw a few weeks ago, that God is up on the mountain giving instructions to Moses about how they're going to build the tabernacle. And so he gives them instructions saying that you are to make a lampstand out of gold. You're to make an altar out of gold, an ark out of gold, poles to carry the ark out of gold. The mercy seat is out of gold. The cherubim, the table for bread, plates, dishes, bowls, pitchers, utensils, frames, pillars, hooks, the breastpiece, cords, rings, bells, on and on and on and on. All of it was to be made out of gold. God had given his people all of this gold to be used for the building of the tabernacle so that he could meet with them, so that he could commune with them. And now, what are they doing? They have decided to use the gold to whore themselves. You know what this would be like? This would be like if there was a rich king in a land who was unbelievably wealthy, unbelievably handsome, unbelievably loving. And he's looking for a bride. And he goes to the slums and he finds a peasant girl who has nothing. And he walks up to her and says, "Here is $1 million. And I want you to take this and use it for yourself, to make yourself beautiful. Use it, get your nails done, get your hair done, buy the best dress, buy the best everything, so that you can make yourself ready to come into my chambers on our wedding night, so that I can enjoy you and you can enjoy me." And so she does that. She takes the $1 million and she gets the best perfume and the best dress and gets her nails and her hair done and gets everything done. And yet on the night of the wedding, she's not with the king. She's down at the local brothel, whoring herself out. That's what's going on here. That's what idolatry is. Verse 4. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with a graving tool, and he made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Now there's so much going on here in this one verse. So I'm just going to have to number them, okay? There's 7 points that I need to point out in this one verse alone. Here they are. Number 1, the people are giving this gold as a free will offering. Now consider the irony of this. Later, when they give for the tabernacle, they're giving the gold as a free will offering. They have taken worship and perverted it. They have taken this gold and are given a free will offering, but it's not to Yahweh, it's to this golden calf. 2, Aaron is the one who's building this calf. I mean, out of all the people, Moses' brother, the high priest, is the one who is building this idol. 3, Aaron fashioned it with a graving tool. The Net Bible has an interesting note here. The Bible says that the verb that's used here for fashion looks similar to the verb yatsar, which means to form, to fashion by a plan or design. That is the exact same verb that's used in Genesis 2:7 for Yahweh God forming the man from the dust of the ground. If it is here, it is the reverse. Here we have a human, the dust of the ground, trying to form a god. 4, the golden calf. The choice of a calf is not arbitrary. All right? This animal was a common pagan idol in the ancient Near East. No more prominent than where? Egypt. The Israelites are making a god that was worshipped in Egypt. 5, these are your gods. The phrase there, when he says, "these are your gods." Now, if you're wondering, why the plural gods? All right. Well, the Hebrew word for God and gods is the exact same word, Elohim. There's no plural form of that. Kind of like deer. We don't say deers or fishes. Right? We only have one word for singular and plural. Elohim, it can be either. So I don't think they made multiple calves. I think they made one. And it's just used the word Elohim there. 6, I don't think they're creating a new God here. I don't think they intended to create a new God here. I mean, I don't think the purpose of this was to substitute for Yahweh. I think they're intending to create a physical representation of Yahweh. I'll explain that in just a minute. But for now, let me just say, I think they're guilty of breaking the second commandment, not necessarily the first. Evil nonetheless, just as evil. And then 7, their phrase, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now again, I don't think the Israelites literally think that this golden calf brought them out of Egypt. I don't think they're that ignorant, okay? I think they have created a golden calf, and now they are assigning Yahweh to that golden calf. They're assigning the presence of Yahweh to the golden calf. I think that's what they're doing. But don't miss the disheartening statement that they make here. When God gave his 10 commandments, do you remember how he began them? He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. They have now taken God's very own words and ascribed them to a piece of metal. This would be like taking your husband's wedding vows and ascribing them to another man. This would be like my wife going to another man and saying, you will always love me. You will be faithful to me at all times. That would get me fired up. Especially if it was worded exactly as I worded it on my wedding vows. That would get me fired up. They take God's words exactly as God worded them and ascribe it to a piece of metal. When we take into account all 7 of those facets, I think Peter Eanes is right when he says it's hard to imagine a worse thing they could have done. Verse 5. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. Now to add insult to injury, Aaron doesn't stop with building the calf. That would have been bad enough. He actually builds an altar for the calf. And he says, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. Now notice he uses the covenant name of God here, what we call Yahweh. Again, thus confirming that this golden calf is not a substitute for Yahweh. It's a physical representation of Yahweh. They have ascribed the presence of Yahweh to this piece of metal. It would appear that Aaron's trying his best to salvage Yahweh worship among the people. Evil, though. We see that good intentions are not always holy intentions. I think Aaron has good intentions. They weren't holy intentions. Now I want you to notice where he puts the idol, where he puts the altar. He puts the altar before the idol. I like what Douglas Stewart surmises here. I'll explain this quote because it's a lot to kind of chew on. Douglas Stewart writes here, building an altar in front of a god or an idol conformed to the expected positioning of sacrifices and idolatry. It guaranteed that the god would see the offerings made to him and accept them. By contrast, the orthodox biblical positioning of the altar in the courtyard of the tabernacle and later the temple, so that there was no direct line of sight from the ark into the Holy of Holies to the altar because of the curtain and veil hiding the ark, was actually a positioning that required Israelites to have the faith to understand that the one true God actually saw what they did for him without having his idol right behind and facing the altar on which they did it. Now, what Stewart is saying there is that it was very easy to build an altar in front of an idol because you could see the idol. And you just suspended your belief to believe that the idol saw your worship. But the commoner who came to the tabernacle and the temple to worship, remember, the burnt offering altar is out in the court. They can't see the Holy of Holies. They can't see the ark. They can't see God's presence. So they had to believe by faith that God saw their sacrifice. That's a lot more difficult. This goes hand in hand with Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. Remember Jesus teaching in the Sermon on the Mount? He says, when you give, let people know you did it. No. He says, when you give, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is giving, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you fast, tell people how hungry you are. No. He says, go about your business like everything is exactly the same, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you pray, come up to the front here and pray. No. He says, go into your closet and close the door where no one sees you praying, and your Father in secret will reward you. It takes a level of faith to believe that God sees our worship when no one else sees it. I know we wrestle with this, right? I know many of us wrestle with the idea of like, what's the point of giving and fasting and praying and reading my Bible? Because God sees it. God sees it and is pleased by it. Verse 6. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. It says they rose up early. I find that interesting and convicting. I used to love playing golf. I've only played golf once since I moved here because it's so wet. But I used to love playing golf. And sometimes the only tee time that I could get in the South was like 8 a.m. because people play golf all the time in the South. And, so, even after a long week of working, I'd be up at 6 a.m. Saturday morning, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, eating my Wheaties, tying my shoes, dusting off my clubs. We will wake up early for that which we want to worship. I'm convinced that there are some people, the Super Bowl could come on at 5 a.m. and we'd be up at 3 tailgating, making food. And maybe if you're not into football, maybe shopping deals that start at 4 a.m. Or if we need to catch a plane for a vacation at 3 a.m., we will wake up early for that which we want to worship. The people rose up early the next day to offer burnt offerings and peace offerings. Well, what does that sound like? That sounds like what they're supposed to be doing with the tabernacle. Remember, God's up on the mountain telling them, giving them instructions, saying, you are to come worship me at the tabernacle with burnt offerings and peace offerings. Now they have taken that and perverted it with this idol. Not only are they making offerings, but look at the last verse, the last phrase of verse 6. It says, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. They are enjoying their idolatry. Not only are they engaging in idolatry, they're enjoying it. Now, some translations translate that last phrase, play, with sexual overtones, all right? Depending on what translation you have, it may translate it that way, giving the impression that they were engaging in like a form of orgy of some sort. Let me just clarify, I don't think that's suggested here, all right? The Hebrew word for play can carry the nuance of playfulness or flirting, but to suggest sexual activity, I think is a bit of a stretch. Later, when Moses and Joshua come down the mountain, what is described by Moses and Joshua is singing, shouting, and dancing. Okay, so I don't think they're engaging in sexual activity. However, they are partying. They are having a good time. This is not worship at 10 a.m. at a Southern Baptist church. They're eating and drinking and dancing and joyfully celebrating in their sin, in their idolatry. I still remember the season that God showed me that the level of excitement, I used to love watching sports. I don't watch it anymore. It's fine if you do. It's not wrong to watch sports. I used to love watching sports though. And I remember the season when God began revealing to me, I would look around the room and I would see the level of joy and excitement and cheering and screaming and clapping and in my life too. I was like number one, the loudest in the... And I said, and God just opened my eyes one day and said, surely this was meant for God. Surely this level of excitement was meant for God. And maybe it's not football for you. Maybe it's shopping. Maybe it's vacationing. Maybe it's relationships or food. Only you and God know. And perhaps those closest to you. What we get excited and joyfully celebrate in. And it's not wrong to celebrate. It's just, do we have that for God? Now the question I have, after reading these 6 verses and after expositing it, and the question I have is, why did they do this? Why did the people engage in idolatry? Why did they build this calf? This is an important question because it's the same question that we should be asking ourselves today. Why do we engage in idolatry? Why? What is it about idolatry that's so attractive? I mean, there must be something attractive about sin to make us desire it. All sin, is basically looking at God on one hand, all right, and everything that He offers and being like, okay, I see what you're offering there. And then looking at anything else on this hand, okay, and concluding that this will make me happier. You can boil all sin down to that. All of it. The first sin in the garden. God says, you may eat from any tree that you want, and all of them that you want, except one. Okay? Got it? And then one tree. Every tree, minus one. There's something so attractive about that one. Man, and Adam and Eve just had to have it. They had everyone. It's not just an Adam and Eve problem. It's not just an Israelite problem. We will see that idolatry is at the foundation of the problems that pervade God's people. All throughout the Old Testament, all throughout the New Testament, down to this very day, even when we leave this place. My biggest problem in my life, your biggest problem in your life, is idolatry. If I could just learn to love God with all my heart and soul and mind, if I could just learn to do that, all my problems would immediately go away. But therein lies the problem. I still wrestle with finding sin attractive. I still wrestle with finding idols attractive. And my question is, why? We can look all day and be like, why did you find a golden calf? Why do you find shopping attractive? Why do you find Seahawks attractive? Why do you... We can all ask ourselves the same question. Why do we find idols attractive? What is it about them? I came across this excursus a couple of years ago. He calls it an excursus. And Douglas Stewart's commentary on Exodus. I'm going to share it with you as the remainder of the sermon. The reason I'm going to share it with you, because when I first read this, it was so helpful to me. And it has stuck with me through the years. The reason it was so helpful, because it was helpful for me to understand the nature of my own idolatry. Part of the reason that we wrestle with idolatry so much is that we don't understand ourselves. Scripture teaches us the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? I don't understand my own heart. And I would bet you don't understand your own either. I don't understand why I can worship God and pray and sing and praise Him and say that I love Him and serve Him, and then 40 days later be seeking out an idol who will go before me. Seeking out an idol who I think will make me happy. We all seek out idols to make us happy. And the question is, why? And Douglas Stewart's excursus on the attractions of idolatry was so helpful to me in learning something about myself so that I would not find idolatry attractive. So that I could learn to find waiting on God 40 days and 40 nights attractive. So that I could find doing the will of God attractive. So I want to share with you the excursus. I hope you'll listen. I think if you will listen to this and pay attention and take notes perhaps, or go back and read it, I think it will help you to defeat idolatry in your life. Help you. He gave 9 attractions of idolatry. We're going to look at the first 8. We're just going to look at the 8. All right? And I'm going to apply them to our story this morning, and then I'm going to apply them to us. All right? So here they are. We're going to go through them very quickly. Number 1. Idolatry is attractive because it's guaranteed. Stewart writes, ancients assumed that the presence of a god or a goddess was guaranteed by the presence of an idol, since the idol partook of the very essence of the divinity it was designed to represent. This is exactly what we see going on here in Exodus 32. I mean, how difficult is it to pray to a God that you can't see, to give money to a God whose hands you can't feel, to make sacrifices to a God that there's no guarantee He sees it or recognizes it. But if I have an idol that I can see, that I can touch, that I can feel, the idol will hear my prayers. The idol will see my sacrifices. The Israelites wanted a guarantee that God would go before them. Yeah, He had given them a guarantee when He parted the Red Sea, when He had provided manna in the desert and water from the rock and bread from heaven and winning their battles. But listen, there's no guarantee that God will continue to do this. There's no guarantee that He's going to continue to do this. Idolatry is tempting because we want guarantees. I want to encourage you. God has given us a guarantee. He's given us multiple guarantees. God said, I will never leave you or forsake you. And behold, Jesus said, I am with you always to the end of the age. We have to ask ourselves, is that enough? Is Jesus' words enough? See, one of the ways I had to defeat idolatry was I had to get to a place where I had to make a daily choice to tell myself, Jesus is enough for me. Even if I don't feel like He is, I'm going to make a choice to believe that He is. 2, selfish. Accordingly, it was felt that if one fed a given god, that God was in turn obligated to use His power on behalf of the feeder worshiper. You know, it's very easy to worship God when everything's going great, when God is blessing the grain and the wine and the animals. But the moment that God brings us into a desert, the moment that God removes the grain, removes the wine, maybe even removes His tangible, immediate presence, that's when we discover why we worship God. God brought them into a desert. He had them live on manna, drink water from a rock, where they had to trust God to provide for them day by day. But it's been 40 days, and we miss our cucumbers and melons and onions and garlics and leeks. Aaron, your brother said that if we worship God, He would bring us to a good place. This is not a good place, Aaron. God owes this to us. You ever been there? I know I have. You ever felt like God owed you something? A job? God, you owe me a job. A relationship? God, you owe me a relationship. Entry into a school? God, I have worked hard. I have studied for 4 years. You owe me to get into this school. An answer to a prayer? Listen, if God doesn't give you what you want, or if he doesn't answer a prayer immediately, I assure you it's a test. A test to see if you will turn and trust him or turn to an idol and trust this idol. You don't find out how much you love God on the mountain. You find out how much you love him in the valley. 3, it's easy. Idolatry is attractive because it's easy. Idolatry minimized the importance of ethical behavior. Ritual provision of food to the gods was important. Keeping a divinely revealed covenant was not. It's very easy to take some god, fashion a calf, bow down to it, make offerings to it. That's easy. Anybody can do that. It's exponentially more difficult to sit and wait for 40 days for God to show up. Idolatry is attractive because it's easy. It's very easy to worship a job, your career, because you can go to your boss and say, give me a checklist of what you want me to do. Okay, check. I can do that. Great, I'm a good employee. I can do that. It's very easy to worship exercise. Give me a list of exercises that you need me to do. Check, deltoids, quads, biceps, pecs. Check. I can do that. It's very easy to do that. And then we come to God and we say, God, can you give me a checklist of what you want me to do? I want a checklist. And we don't get that with God. He doesn't give us a checklist. Why? Because he's after the heart. He's after the heart. That's why he requires us to wait so much. You ever wonder why does God make us wait so much for things? Because that's what he's after, is the heart. You ever wonder why God puts us through so many trials? Because that's what he's after, is the heart. God is after my heart, which is exponentially more difficult. But it's exponentially more satisfying when I give it to him. 4, it's convenient. Idolatry is attractive because it's convenient. Stewart writes, these ubiquitous idol shrines allowed worshipers to take a sacrifice to the gods or goddesses of their choice virtually any time of the day, any day of the week, at a location nearby, and any place they happen to be. We will see later in the Old Testament that the people did not want to worship solely at the tabernacle or the temple. That's partially why they worshiped at the high places. It was convenient. I mean, man, I see this in my life so much. Maybe you do too. I don't know. You know, if I have a bad day, ministry was just hard. It's so easy and convenient to just go get a bowl of ice cream and sit on the couch and watch my favorite TV show. It's convenient. It's an immediate fix. It is exponentially more difficult to go and spend an hour praying, pouring my heart out to God, pouring my anxiety and my stress and my worry and my burdens out to God. Only one of those scenarios fixes my problems, though. And it doesn't begin with blue or end with bell. Idolatry is attractive because it's convenient. But it's not effective. It doesn't actually solve any problems. 5, it's normal. Idolatry was the common way of religion, without exception outside of Israel in the ancient world. Everybody engaged in idolatry. Remember, they're coming out of 430 years of living in Egypt, one of the most polytheistic cultures known to man. Idolatry was just normal. And this trend doesn't stop. You remember in the New Testament when Paul came to Athens? It says, now Paul was waiting for them at Athens. His spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. And this has not changed today. We may not have golden calves or wooden statues on the streets like they did in Athens, but idolatry is still normal. One of the reasons that idolatry is so attractive is because it's mainstream. It's normal. It's accepted. I mean, nobody in the workplace is going up and be like, hey, Bill, can I talk to you? I'm concerned that you're an idolater. Nobody's doing that. In the world. Maybe as a Christian you are, but it's just accepted to be an idolater. It's very difficult, though, to be the one person in the class or the cubicle or at the family dinner table who doesn't go with the flow, who doesn't just jump on the bandwagon of idolatry. It's difficult to stand out. 6, it's logical. Idolatry is attractive because it's logical. The ancients believed in a multiplicity of gods, everyone being a specialist in some aspect of the world or nature. Therefore, the ancients found it enormously attractive to think that they could gain assured access to those gods through idols. It was unthinkable to most ancients that a single God could be the only God. Surely God had provided for them through a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. Surely this angel had gone before them. But what about the Egyptian gods? Egypt was wealthy. Egypt had great success. Egypt won battles, and they worshiped the calf god. So, perhaps if we blend the two together, it will give us double success. Seems logical to me. I want to remind us that the logical choice is not always the godly choice. So much of idolatry is wanting a backup plan in case God fails us. God, I want to trust you with my finances, but I don't know if you're going to always take care of me. So I need a backup plan called 401k or savings, and I'm going to pump all this money. It's not wrong to have a 401k. It is wrong, though, if you pump all your money into it and you're trusting in it. It is wrong if you're placing your trust in your savings because you fear that God might not take care of you. God, I want to trust you with my future, but I don't know if I can really trust you with my future. So I need a backup plan in case you don't take care of me. And it's very easy to make logical decisions that the world would look at. Maybe even your parents who are Christians would say, that's a wise decision. And maybe it is, and maybe it's not. Jesus says no one can serve two masters. Be careful that we are not serving God plus our common sense, logic, reason. Sometimes those are one and the same, and sometimes they're not. Leaving your profession, that's all you've ever known, for 30 years, and your family, and dropping your nets isn't very logical. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Sometimes the logical choice is the godly choice. Sometimes it's not. 7, pleasing to the senses. There's 8 of these. 7, it was hard to appreciate the beauty or attractiveness of someone who refused to be seen. That is Yahweh. God, you won't let me see you. How am I supposed to appreciate you? It's very pleasing to the senses to see this beautiful calf, though. So why was God displeased with it? I mean, have you ever asked yourself, why did God give the second commandment? We get the first, right? God says you should have no other gods before me. Okay, I get that, right? We should only worship you. But why can't we just have a physical representation of you? What, why did you say no idols? Why can we not carve out something and say, this is you, God, and then we worship you? That helps me to worship. You ever ask yourself that question? Why did God forbid? Why did he give the second commandment? Let me give you an illustration to kind of help through this. This is how I think of it. When we go out, I'm going to give 2 ways here, okay? When we go out to a park or the beach or whatever, and we take our boys with us, we bring no electronics. Now, my boys love the iPad. They would play on it all day long. When we go somewhere, we don't bring any electronics. Do you know why? Because we might as well just stay home and sit on the iPad. Because they will sit on the beach, playing on the iPad the whole time. And I'm like, this is supposed to be family time. He's like, well, you can play with them. It's like, yeah, but we might as well just sit home and do that. And they will sit in the corner like Gollum with the ring, and being like just playing, worshiping. I don't actually spend time with them. No iPad when it's family time. Let me give the reverse of it. Anybody got Frank, can I have your phone? We go to the park too, and I see these parents, and they got their kid on the playground, and the whole time they're sitting there. And for like 30 minutes straight, they've never once talked to their kid, played with them, acknowledged them. They're sitting there taking pictures of them, posting it on Facebook, and then reading the comments the whole entire time that their kid's playing. And I want to go over and kick their phone and say, pay attention to your kid. Or I see couples dating, sitting across from each other, taking a selfie, and then sitting there posting it on Facebook and texting the whole time. And I'm like, she's right there, buddy. She's right in front of you. Pay attention to her. She's the thing. Facebook's not the thing. She's the thing. The child is the thing. So God says, I want you to enjoy me. No idol. No medium to worship me through. Because if I let you have a medium, you know what you will do? You'll spend all your time on the medium, and you'll forget the object behind the medium. You'll forget about me. And all your focus and attention will go to this, and you'll forget that I exist. Just like that parent, as their kid is saying, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. Quiet, I'm posting a picture of you on Facebook. Eight, last one. It was indulgent. Picking out thus typified pagan sacrifices in contrast to the more clearly symbolic value of an Orthodox Israelite worship. Heavy drinking and drunkenness also were considered proper in idol worship feasts because debauching oneself was simply part of being generous to a god. One of the reasons that idolatry is attractive is because there's no guidelines. Idolatry allows me to indulge myself in whatever I want. Food, sex, social media, drinking, prescription drugs, video games, shopping, traveling, sports. It's fun to indulge oneself. And yet God tells us we were created to indulge ourselves on Him. Now, it's not that those things are bad. None of those things are bad in and of themselves. They're not. It's just that God is the only thing that we can consume with no limits and it not harm us. But if I have a buffet on one hand or a fast on another, that buffet is looking really attractive. If I have sleeping in on one hand and prayer at 6 a.m. at the other, that bed's looking really attractive. My prayer is that we, including myself, would not make the same mistakes that the Israelites did. Trading God, who infinitely satisfies, for a piece of metal that can never satisfy. Idolatry is attractive. It is. But it's only attractive when we've taken our eyes off of God. You place your eyes upon God, and you don't find these idols attractive. My prayer is that in 2016, we would continue to grow in refining the idols in our life. That we would look back, I hope that one day we look back and say, man, 2016 was a year that God really did a work in my life and killed these idols that I have been worshiping for years. That's my prayer for 2016.